The first light came cold off the salt river, even in a country that spent most of the day trying to burn the skin from a man's bones. Clara Bennett stood ankle-deep at the edge of the current, with her skirt gathered in one hand, and watched Kanda Yaji bend over a flat red stone. Water whispered around his boots. Somewhere in the cottonwoods, a dove called twice and fell silent. Kanda was mending a chain. It was an old silver locket, round as a small coin, with a dent near the hinge and scratches that no amount of polishing could hide. Clara had seen it once before in his hand, but had never asked where it came from. Questions were expensive things between them, not because they feared the answers, but because life in the Arizona territory had trained both of them to leave some truths alone until they were ready to be carried. He threaded a short braid of dark hair through the tiny ring where the chain met the locket and tied it with a knot so fine Clara had to lean closer to see it. "You'll lose half your hair if you keep cutting pieces off for foolish women," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Only one foolish woman." She tried to smile, but the autumn hunt had already entered the morning between them. Kanda was leaving with 2 other men from the high mesa to follow deer north of the canyon country. He might be gone 3 weeks. He might be gone 6. Rain had torn away part of the trail, and every rider who came through Bitter Creek had a different story about bandits, washed-out crossings, and army patrols that stopped Apache men more readily than white thieves. Kanda closed Clara's fingers around the locket. "Keep it where people don't put their hands." "That includes my father?" "That includes everybody." She looked up at him. His face gave away very little, but she knew the small changes. The way his jaw tightened when he was worried, the way his eyes shifted toward the ridge when he heard something she could not, the way his fingers stayed on hers a moment longer when he had more to say than he trusted to words. "Come back before the first hard frost," she said. "I intend to. That isn't a promise." He glanced toward the river, then toward the high country where morning sun had begun to find the tops of the cliffs. "No. A promise is something a man makes when he controls what comes next." Clara hated that answer because it was true. Kanda took the locket back, opened it, and showed her the little braid secured inside. "This is a promise," he said. "What happens next is not." She swallowed. Then he touched 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist, where her pulse jumped against her skin, and handed the locket to her again. When he rode away, Clara stayed by the river until the sun climbed high enough to dry the wet edge of her dress. She watched the dust from his horse disappear beyond the mesquite and told herself she would not count the days. She counted everyone. 2 months later, Silas Thorne arrived at the Bennett ranch with Kanda's hat folded under his arm. Clara heard his buggy before she saw it. The wheels knocked over the hard ground in a steady, self-important rhythm. Her father sat on the porch with a whiskey bottle between his boots and made no move to stand. Elias Bennett had once been broad across the shoulders and quick with a joke. Debt had narrowed him. Drink had hollowed the rest. Silas stepped down in a black coat too expensive for ranch work and brushed dust from his cuff as though the land itself had insulted him. "I'm sorry to bring this here," he said. He was not looking at Elias. He was looking at Clara. She wiped her hands on her apron and stared at the hat. The crown was split. Red mud had dried along the brim. "Where did you get that?" Silas's face arranged itself into grief. "Upper Salt River Pass." There was a slide. Clara did not move. "My men found the trail buried. Part of the ledge came down. We found gear below the shale. That hat among it, his body?" Silas hesitated only a fraction of a second. "No body worth bringing home." The answer struck Clara harder than if he had shouted. Elias made a wounded sound and lifted the bottle. Clara looked at Silas instead. His boots were polished. His nails were clean. His eyes were alert in the way of a buyer inspecting an animal before naming a price. "Who was with him?" she asked. "Scouts, hunters, men from the mesa. Names." Silas's pleasant expression thinned. "I'm trying to spare you details. I asked for names. You should be grateful anyone bothered to search." That was the first thing he said that she believed. Clara slipped one hand into her apron pocket and closed it around the locket. The silver edge pressed into her palm. "Where was the slide?" Silas told her. "Upper Pass, east wall, beyond the fork where the canyon split." Kanda had told her he was riding north. The upper pass lay west. She said nothing. Silas mistook her silence for surrender. Men like him often did. In the weeks that followed, Bitter Creek buried Kanda without a grave. The church prayed for a soul most of its members had never treated kindly while he was alive. Men at the tavern spoke of the danger of the high country and shook their heads as if the mountain had merely completed a task they expected of it. Women brought Clara bread, preserves, and advice she had not requested. They spoke around Kanda's name, never through it. Martha Higgins came one afternoon, carrying a jar of peaches and enough lavender water to cover the smell of dust from the road. Widow Higgins was a hard woman with a narrow face and hands that had mended clothes, butchered chickens, buried a husband, and raised a son without ever asking anyone to call her brave. She sat in Clara's parlor and spoke carefully at first. "Folks are worried about you. Folks have always been worried about the wrong things." Martha looked toward the door to make sure Elias was not listening. "They say you still go to the river. I wash there. You have a pump. The pump tastes of iron." Martha's eyes dropped to the faint outline beneath Clara's collar. Clara's hand moved instinctively to cover it. The widow sighed. "You cannot live with one foot in a memory." Clara said nothing. "Silas Thorne has made himself useful to this town. He owns notes on half the cattle between here and the ridge. People will not cross him for a dead man. There it is." "What?" "The real condolence." Martha's mouth tightened. "I'm telling you the shape of the fence before you ride into it." She reached toward the locket, perhaps to see it, perhaps to remove it. Clara caught her wrist so quickly the peach jar rattled on the table. For a moment the women stared at each other. Martha's face changed first. Some old hardness in it gave way to surprise. "You still have teeth," she said quietly. Clara released her. "Enough." The widow stood. At the door she looked back. "Keep them," she said. "You're going to need them." It was the closest thing to kindness Clara received all winter. The winter became spring, then summer, then another winter. Kanda did not return. Clara searched the place Silas had named 3 times in the first 6 months. The sheriff searched once, reluctantly, with 2 men who stopped when the slope began to shift beneath their boots. No body was found, no rifle, no saddle, only shattered cedar, red shale, and a strip of leather that could have belonged to anyone. The missing things mattered more to Clara than the things they found. She remembered what Kanda had taught her about tracks on the first cold morning they had ridden together beyond the south pasture. He had knelt beside a mark so faint she could barely see it and told her not to look for the footprint. Look for what the foot changed. A pebble turned. Grass pressed the wrong direction. Dust missing from one side of a stone. Nothing leaves without changing something. So Clara waited and watched the changes. Silas Thorne became more interested in the Bennett ranch after Kanda vanished. That was one change. Elias drank more. That was another. Notes that had once carried ordinary interest suddenly acquired penalties, fees, and deadlines. A surveyor hired by Silas found an old question about the Bennett water rights. A cattle buyer who had promised Elias a fair price withdrew without explanation. The bank in the territorial capital stopped extending credit. By the second year, the Bennett herd had been cut by more than half. Clara sold her mother's walnut wardrobe to buy seed. She traded 2 calves for flour and lamp oil. She patched the roof with flattened kerosene tins and learned to sleep through the drip when rain found the seams anyway. Silas visited often enough that his horse learned where to stand in their yard. He never asked whether Clara missed Kanda. He did not need to. He preferred to speak of practical things: firewood, taxes, interest, security, marriage. The first time he proposed, he did it at the kitchen table with a ledger open between them. Elias was too drunk to lift his head. Silas tapped a column of numbers with one clean fingernail. "Your father has 3 months before I am legally entitled to foreclose." Clara stood at the stove stirring beans that had burned along the bottom of the pot. "You rehearsed that sentence. I prefer clarity." "No, you prefer numbers because they don't spit in your face." He smiled. "I could clear every note. The land remains in the family. Your father keeps his room. You keep the house. And what do you keep?" His gaze traveled over her slowly. "Everything worth saving." Clara set the spoon down. The room smelled of scorched beans, wood smoke, and the sour whiskey sweating from Elias's skin. She thought of the salt river in autumn. She thought of Kanda's fingers tying a piece of his own hair into silver. "No." Silas closed the ledger. "You may change your answer after you understand the alternative." The alternative arrived in pieces. A lien on the south field, a claim against 2 horses, a notice from the land office bearing a purple territorial seal, a visit from Reverend Miller, who spoke of duty in a gentle voice that made Clara want to throw him off the porch. The Reverend never said Silas had paid for repairs to the church roof. He did not need to. Everyone in Bitter Creek knew who had paid for the fresh shingles. "You are alone in a difficult country." He told her in his study. There is no shame in accepting protection. Protection from whom? His eyes slid away. From hardship. Hardship has never needed a marriage license to find me. Clara. The rebuke in his voice was mild, paternal, and worse for it. He spoke of reputation, of an unmarried woman running a failing ranch, of the years Clara had spent close to a man the town had considered unsuitable, of old talk that had never stopped, only lowered its voice. Silas sat in the corner, quiet and satisfied. When Clara walked out of the church, she heard a horse screaming in the square. A bay gelding was tied short to the rail near the trough, blowing foam around the bit while one of Silas's men hauled on the reins. Silas followed Clara into the sunlight, took a whip from the man, and struck the horse across the flank. Clara stopped. The saddle was Kanda's. She knew the dark patch on the cantle where river water had stained the leather years earlier. She knew the braided rawhide loop he had replaced with his own hands. But the horse was not Kanda's black Mustang. Silas struck the bay again. Clara stepped between them. The square went quiet. "You'll move," Silas said. "No. That animal came out of the canyon after the slide." Clara put her hand on the bay's neck. The gelding trembled under her palm. "You told the sheriff Kanda's horse went under the rocks with him." Silas's eyes sharpened. "I said his gear was found. You said there was nothing left worth bringing home. I was sparing you. This isn't his horse." The words landed between them. Silas looked at the animal, then back at her. "How touching that you remember the difference." "I remember everything." For the first time, she saw real anger pass across his face, not because she had challenged him, because she had noticed. Clara took the reins and led the bay home. That night, Elias coughed blood into a handkerchief. The fever came hard and fast. For 3 days, Clara cooled his face with damp cloths, changed sweat-soaked sheets, spooned broth past cracked lips, and listened to him speak nonsense about cattle that had been sold a year earlier. On the 4th night, he woke clear enough to know her. "I ruined it," he whispered. Clara wrung out the cloth over the basin. "What? Your mother's place? Her land, your life. Sleep? I signed papers. I know. I thought I could win it back." His face folded. She regretted the cruelty as soon as she said it, but did not apologize. Elias stared at the ceiling. "Thorne says he'll clear it all if you marry him." Clara's hand stopped over the basin. "I told him no." "I know." He turned his head toward her. His eyes were wet, whether from fever or shame she could not tell. "If I die owing him, he takes the place. Then he takes it. And you?" She looked at her father and saw not the man who had failed her, but the man who knew he had failed her and was dying before he could repair it. "That was harder to hate. I'll manage." "You always say that." "Because I always do." His breathing became rough again. Clara sat beside him until dawn. When he woke a second time, she lied. She told him she had reconsidered. She told him Silas could give her a life without hunger or foreclosure notices. She told him she was tired of fighting the ranch alone. Elias closed his eyes in relief. Clara felt something inside her close with them. By noon, the engagement was public. Silas celebrated in the tavern as though he had won an election. He bought drinks for miners, freight men, ranch hands, and the same men who had once laughed with Kanda over horses at the blacksmith's yard. Clara sat near the wall and listened to Silas discuss the Bennett acreage without once using her father's name. Martha Higgins brought her a cup of cider. "It's sour," the widow said. "So is the occasion." Martha sat beside her. For a while they watched Silas laugh. "You don't have to like me," Martha said. "I don't. Good. Saves time." Clara looked at her. The widow kept her gaze on the room. "I was wrong about the locket." Clara said nothing. "I thought the town could shame grief out of you and call it mercy. Towns are good at dressing cowardice in clean language. Why tell me now?" "Because that man has started smiling before he enters your house." Clara looked toward Silas. He was holding a glass in one hand and explaining to 3 men where he intended to move the northern fence. The ranch was already his in his mind. That was when Clara stopped waiting for someone else to save it. 2 days before the wedding, Silas ordered her to clean his study at the ranch house he kept near the center of town. He called it preparation for her future duties. Clara called it an opportunity. The room smelled of cigar smoke, leather, and the lavender pomade he used too heavily. She dusted slowly. She emptied the ashtray. She arranged invoices. She read everything within reach. In the wastebasket beneath the desk, she found a torn map. Not torn accidentally. Torn in half, then crushed. She smoothed the pieces on her thigh and fitted them together. The Salt River Gorge had been drawn in black ink. The place Silas had named as the rock slide was marked with a circle. 3 miles west, a second mark had been made in red pencil. Beside it were notes in another hand. Cut support. Loose shale after rain. Stage men paid. No search West Fork. Clara's mouth went dry. There was a brown stain near the bottom edge. She did not need to know whether it was blood to understand what she was holding. She folded the map and slipped it under her apron. A floorboard creaked behind her. Silas stood in the doorway holding the wedding dress. Ivory silk spilled over his arm. For a second neither spoke. Then he smiled. "You have curious hands." Clara kept her face still. "You have dirty rooms." He laid the dress over a chair. The seamstress finished early. "I'm touched. You should be. It cost more than most families here earn in a year." He came closer. Clara did not retreat until the edge of the desk pressed into the back of her thighs. Silas took her wrist. His grip was not wild. That made it worse. "Whatever you think you found," he said, "remember that your father's debt is legal. The sheriff understands that. The land office understands that. Reverend Miller understands that. Do you?" His thumb pressed into the inside of her wrist until pain pulsed into her palm. "You will wear that dress at dawn. You will say the words. And by breakfast, this unpleasant chapter in your life will be closed." "What chapter is that?" "The one where you keep confusing stubbornness with freedom." He released her. Clara left without looking at the dress. That night she copied the map by lamplight. She had no trusted rider to carry it. The road out of Bitter Creek was watched, and Silas's men had begun appearing at the Bennett gate after dark, so she used the only messenger she had. Elias once kept homing doves for sending short notes to a cousin who trapped in the foothills. Most were gone, eaten by hawks or sold when feed became scarce. One gray bird remained in a wicker cage behind the tool shed. Clara tied a narrow strip of paper to its leg. West Fork was cut, Silas lied. If Kanda lives, warn his people. Wedding at dawn in Bitter Creek. She did not know whether the bird would reach anyone. Hope no longer required certainty. She carried the cage to the irrigation ditch before sunrise and opened the small door. The dove sat on her palm, warm and frightened. "Go on," Clara whispered. Its wings beat once against her fingers and it rose over the cottonwoods. A rifle cracked from the mesquite. The bird folded in the air. Gray feathers drifted down in the cold light. Clara did not scream. One of Silas's hired men stepped from behind the brush and lowered his Winchester. "Mr. Thorne said there'd be no messages leaving the property." The note was still tied to the dead bird's leg. The man picked it up. Clara watched him unfold it. He looked at the words, then at her. Seems he was right to worry. Clara looked past him toward the high mesa. The ridge was empty. But the wind had changed. 2 years earlier, on the morning Silas Thorne's men had rolled stones into the west fork of the Salt River Gorge, Kanda Yaji had known something was wrong before the mountain moved. The rain had stopped before dawn. Water still dripped from the juniper branches, but the ledge beneath his horse sounded dry when the iron shoes struck it. Too dry. The creek below ran brown and loud from runoff, carrying sticks and foam between the boulders. Kanda rode at the rear of a small party. 2 freight men were ahead, men he knew by sight but not by trust. They had been hired to show him where a survey crew supposedly needed a scout through the upper cut. The work paid well, too well for a short ride. His Mustang Nantan began to slow. The black horse had crossed broken ground since it was young. It did not shed shadows, it did not fear water, but now its ears flattened and its nostrils widened. Kanda dismounted. One of the freight men looked back. Trouble? Kanda crouched near a cedar brace built against the unstable wall of the trail. The wood had been cut almost through. Fresh pale fibers showed beneath the wet bark. He stood. The freight men were already moving away. "Get off the ledge," he called. They ran instead. A rifle shot struck the rock beside his shoulder. Nantan lunged. The second shot hit the rope securing a stack of timber above them. Kanda saw the first stones shift. There was no time to understand the whole trap, only time to move. He slapped the horse's neck and drove it toward a narrow notch between the canyon wall and the outer drop. The mountain came down. Sound disappeared inside sound. Rock struck his shoulder and spun him. He remembered red dust turning the sky black. He remembered Nantan screaming. He remembered falling, then not falling, then a crushing weight across his ribs that made breathing impossible. When he woke, he could not see his own hand. He was wedged beneath an overhang in a pocket created by 2 boulders. His left leg was trapped below the knee. Blood ran warm down his neck. For a while he thought the darkness meant night. Then he heard the river and understood that daylight existed somewhere beyond the stone. Nantan was alive. The horse was several yards away in the same broken hollow, separated from him by a slab of rock. Kanda heard the animal breathing and the occasional scrape of an iron shoe against shale. That sound kept him awake. For 3 days his world became thirst, pain, darkness, and the black horse beyond the stone. He loosened his trapped leg by digging with a broken piece of cedar until his fingernails split. He found a thin trickle of seep water on the second day and drank from the stone. He tore a strip from his shirt, wrapped his shoulder, and slept in moments so short he dreamed standing up. Once he woke certain Clara was sitting beside him. He could smell lye soap and sage. He opened his eyes to darkness. He reached beneath his shirt for the place where he usually carried the silver locket and remembered he had given it to her. Good, he thought. Something of me is not here. On the third night after the fever began, he heard voices above the slide. Not rescuers. One of the freight men said, "No one gets through that." Another voice answered, "Thorne wants the west trail watched a week, then we clear out." Kanda lay perfectly still. A boot dislodged pebbles somewhere overhead. Dust sifted down onto his face. Find the horse? No, doesn't matter. They'll call it buried. The men moved on. Kanda understood then that surviving the slide was only the first problem. If he climbed out too soon, they would finish what the rocks had failed to do. He waited until the fourth night. Nantan helped more than any man could have. The horse had enough room to turn and had pulled loose a length of rope, still attached to the broken saddle rigging. Kanda crawled through a crack in the fallen stone, tied the rope around a cedar root above him, and used the horse's weight to drag himself up a slope he could not have climbed alone. He lost consciousness before dawn. A hunting party from the high mesa found him the next afternoon. His mother, Atsa, later told him that he looked like a dead man who had changed his mind. For 6 weeks he could barely walk. For 4 months he could not ride more than an hour without the world going gray at the edges. He sent word toward Bitter Creek as soon as he was able. The first messenger never returned. The second came back with a story. Silas Thorne had men on the road asking questions about any Apache rider moving south. The sheriff had recorded Kanda as presumed dead. A notice had been posted warning that unidentified men from the mesa might be connected to livestock theft. The trap had widened beyond the canyon. Kanda could have ridden into Bitter Creek anyway. He nearly did. His mother stopped him by putting his army discharge papers in his hand. "You lived," she said. "Do not spend that life proving you can die." Kanda had worked as a scout for federal troops years earlier, before returning to horse work and ranching near Bitter Creek. The papers mattered in a world where white officials often pretended not to know an Apache man's name unless another white man had written it down first. They did not make him equal. They did not make him safe, but they gave him a trail through offices Silas could not entirely control. So Kanda did something harder than revenge. He waited. He healed. He gathered proof. The freight men who had fled the slide disappeared into stage work west of the territory. One died in a knife fight outside Yuma. The other, Caleb Morrow, drank heavily enough to talk when Kanda finally found him 10 months later in a mining camp near the Colorado River. Morrow denied everything until Kanda laid one of the cut cedar wedges on the table between them. Then the man began to sweat. Kanda did not threaten him. He did not need to. Morrow had spent almost a year waiting for Silas to pay the second half of what he owed. Men who buy loyalty cheaply often forget that unpaid loyalty changes owners. Morrow signed a statement before a federal clerk. He named Silas. He named the other hired men. He described the cut supports, the rifle shots, and the false accident report. Kanda carried the statement to an army officer who remembered his service and to a land agent who had once inspected Bennett water rights. That was where the second theft became visible. Silas had not merely pressured Elias with legitimate debt. He had altered survey language, attached fees that had never been approved, and submitted a transfer document carrying the signature of a land registrar who had been dead for 6 months when the paper was supposedly witnessed. Kanda sent copies toward Bitter Creek. None arrived. He sent a letter to Clara through a stage driver. No answer. He sent another. Nothing. Months passed. That silence frightened him more than the men on the road. By the second autumn, he received a short message from the federal office. A protection order had been issued against interference with his travel, and a hearing had been opened into Silas Thorne's land transactions. The documents were dry, formal things. They contained no mention of love, grief, or the nights Kanda woke with stone pressing against his chest. But paper had built Silas's power. Paper could also open the door to his ruin. Kanda packed the orders into a leather tube, saddled Nantan, and rode south. He did not know about the wedding until he reached a trading post 2 days from Bitter Creek. The storekeeper recognized him and dropped a tin cup. "You're supposed to be dead." "So I've heard." The man stared at the scar along Kanda's temple. "Thorne marries Bennett's girl at dawn on Thursday." Kanda stopped breathing for one long second. "Which Thursday?" The storekeeper looked at the dark window. "Tomorrow." Kanda was in the saddle before the man finished offering him coffee. Back at the Bennett ranch, Clara did not know any of this. She knew only that her message had been shot from the sky. By afternoon, Silas had the dead dove placed on the kitchen table. He did not mention the note. He did not need to. "You always were inventive," he said. Clara stood at the sink rinsing flour from a bowl. "Birds bother you now? Messages bother me. So you read it." "I read everything that concerns my property." She turned. His mistake was so plain she almost laughed. "Your property?" Silas's face remained calm. "Our property. After tomorrow. No, you said what you meant." He walked to the table and touched one gray feather with his fingertip. "You are exhausted, Clara. Exhausted people mistake harsh facts for cruelty. What do cruel people mistake themselves for?" His hand flattened against the table. She expected anger. Instead, he smiled. "A husband. By tomorrow morning." He left the bird where it was. Clara buried it beneath the cottonwood near the ditch. She buried the original map copy with it inside a small tobacco tin. The second copy remained sewn into the lining of her work coat. That evening, Silas brought men to whitewash the Bennett barn. The act seemed absurd until Clara saw what they were covering. Years earlier, Kanda had painted 2 simple marks on the western gable using ochre, charcoal, and animal fat, a flowing line for the river, and above it 3 angular peaks for safe passage through the high country. He had done it after repairing the roof, mostly to make Clara laugh at the outrage it caused Reverend Miller. Silas ordered both marks covered. A hired hand lifted the brush. Clara walked from the porch to the barn. "Stop." The hand looked toward Silas. Silas nodded for him to continue. White paint dragged across the first blue-black line. Clara felt something inside her go very still. "This house will look respectable," Silas said beside her. "It looked respectable before you arrived. It looked divided. It was mine." He leaned close enough that she smelled tobacco on his coat. Not for long. The second brushstroke covered the mountain mark. Clara did not give him the satisfaction of watching her react. She went inside and shut her bedroom door. Sleep came badly. When she woke near midnight, Silas was standing in the doorway with a candle. He had taken off his coat. His collar was open. He did not enter, but the fact that he was there at all made Clara's skin tighten. "What are you doing? Listening to what?" "You call his name in your sleep." Clara pushed herself upright. "Get out." Silas watched her. "The dead cannot answer. Then you have nothing to fear." Something passed behind his eyes. He turned and left. Clara sat awake until morning, thinking about that look. Fear, real fear. She had seen it when she challenged him about the horse. She had seen it when he found her in his study. Now she saw it again at the mention of Kanda. Silas did not behave like a man certain of a death. He behaved like a man afraid his lie might walk through a door. Martha Higgins fitted the wedding dress the next day in the back room of her shop. The gown was ivory silk with too much lace and a corset stiff enough to bruise. Clara stood on a wooden crate while Martha pinned the hem. "Thorne chose the size," the widow muttered. "Of course he did. He was wrong. He often is." Martha pulled the fabric tighter at Clara's waist. "You've lost weight. I've lost cattle. That too." A pin went through the silk and caught Clara's hip. She flinched. Martha looked up. "There you are." Clara frowned. "I was beginning to think you'd gone numb. Is stabbing brides part of your service?" "Only the stubborn ones." Martha removed the pin and dabbed the tiny spot of blood with her thumb. Then, without looking at Clara, she said, "The North Road is being watched." Clara's breath stopped. Martha kept pinning. "So is the bridge. 2 men at each until the ceremony. How do you know?" "My Tommy hears things when grown men forget boys have ears. Why tell me?" The widow sat back on her heels. "Because I have spent 2 years pretending that what happened to you was unfortunate instead of convenient for the people doing it." Clara looked at the gray crown of her head. "Martha, if you plan to run, do it before dark. They're at the ranch too." Martha closed her eyes briefly. "Then I'm sorry. I don't need sorry." "No." The widow stood with difficulty. "You need a door." There was no door. That night Elias tried to make one. He came into the hall before dawn wearing his old coat and boots, sober enough to shake from it. In his hand was a small leather pouch. "My father gave me these," he whispered. "I told myself I was keeping them for an emergency. Turns out I was keeping them because I was a coward." He poured 3 gold coins into Clara's palm. "Take the mare behind the shed. Ride south until the road splits. Don't use the stage route." Clara looked at the coins. "You'll lose the ranch." "I already lost my daughter." Her throat tightened. "Pa go." She stepped toward the back window. A man with a rifle stood near the trough. Another shadow moved beyond the barn. Clara closed her hand around the gold. "They're all around us." Elias looked through the crack in the curtain. His shoulders dropped. The parlor door opened. Silas leaned against the frame. He had been listening. "Touching," he said. Elias moved in front of Clara. It was a small gesture, late by years, but real. Silas held out his hand. "Give me the pouch." "No," Elias said. Silas looked almost amused. "I own the note on this house. I own the liens on the stock. I own the claim that keeps you from a debtor's hearing. You do not have enough gold there to buy breakfast in the life you have made." Elias did not move. Silas's amusement vanished. One of his men appeared behind him. Clara placed the pouch in Silas's palm before her father could do something that would get him shot. Silas waited. Then he walked to the hearth. He dropped the coins into an iron ladle. "What are you doing?" Elias asked. Silas used the poker to stir the coals, removing temptation. Gold does not melt quickly in an ordinary hearth, but Silas was not interested in accuracy. He was interested in spectacle. He heated the coins until they darkened, then hammered them against the stone with the flat of the poker, scoring the faces and bending one at the edge. He tossed the damaged pieces into the ashes and poured lamp oil over the leather pouch before setting it alight. The room filled with the stink of burning hide. "You see?" he said. "Money is only useful while a man stronger than you agrees that it is." Clara stared at him. "You're afraid." Silas stopped. Elias looked from one to the other. Clara took a step closer. "That is what this is. The guards, the bird, the barn. You're not preparing for a wedding, you're building a wall." Silas's face changed. For one heartbeat she saw the man beneath the polished coat, sleepless, frightened, furious. Then the mask returned. "At dawn," he said, "you will understand which one of us has cause to be afraid." He left the house. Clara waited until his footsteps faded. Then she went to her room, took the Salt River locket from around her neck, and opened her sewing basket. She could not risk Silas finding it during the ceremony. She also could not leave it behind. So she pulled a strand of her own hair, threaded it through a needle, and stitched the locket into a hidden fold in the hem of the wedding dress. Kanda's hair was inside the silver. Hers held it in place. The thought steadied her. Before sunrise she dressed alone. No mother brushed her hair, no friend fastened the buttons. The room smelled of cold ashes and starch. The gown dragged against the floor with a whisper like paper sliding over a grave. When Clara looked in the cracked mirror, she did not see a bride. She saw evidence waiting to speak. Far north of Bitter Creek, Kanda rode under the last stars. Nantan's flanks were dark with sweat. The horse had covered ground that should have required another day, but Kanda had given him rest only in short intervals beside water. Near midnight they reached the ridge above the Salt River slide. Kanda stopped. He had not intended to return to the place before going to town, but something pale caught in the moonlight among the thorn bushes below. He dismounted and climbed down. It was an eagle feather tied at the quill, with faded blue sewing thread. Clara's thread. She had been there. Kanda held the feather between 2 fingers. Near it, half protected beneath a stone, he found a boot print smaller than his own, and a shallow mark where someone had knelt. The sight hurt more than his scars. For 2 years he had feared, Clara had believed the story, and buried him in her heart. Instead, she had come to the rocks and looked for what was missing. He put the feather in his hatband. At the top of the ridge, he opened the leather tube and checked the documents one more time. Morrow's sworn statement, copies of the forged land papers, the federal travel protection, and an order instructing the Bitter Creek sheriff to detain Silas Thorne pending investigation if the evidence was presented and verified. Kanda had no faith that paper alone would move men who had spent years bending for Silas's money. But paper, a living witness, and a town full of eyes might. He mounted. Dawn was coming. Below him, Bitter Creek's church bell began to ring. Silas did not sleep at the Bennett Ranch that night. He told everyone he preferred the room behind Reverend Miller's study because it placed him near the church and spared him the morning ride. The truth was less practical. The ranch had begun to feel crowded with things he could not control: Clara's silence, Elias's shame, the half-scraped mark on the barn, the memory of a dead dove on a kitchen table. Near 2 in the morning, Silas woke with his hand around the pistol beneath his pillow. For several seconds he did not know where he was. Moonlight came through the narrow church window and laid a pale bar across the floor. The room smelled of old paper, candle wax, and his own sweat. He had dreamed of the West Fork. In the dream he stood above the ledge while the supports gave way. Red stone poured into the canyon. Then the rock slide reversed. Every boulder climbed back up the slope. Dust flew upward. Broken cedar joined itself. At the bottom, Kanda stood where he should have been crushed, looking at Silas without anger. That calm gaze had frightened him more than vengeance would have. A board creaked in the hallway. Silas sat upright and pointed the pistol at the door. "Who's there?" No answer. He pulled back the hammer. The door moved a fraction in the draft. Silas fired. The shot split the quiet of the church. Wood burst from the doorframe. Reverend Miller shouted from the other room. Silas sat breathing hard with gun smoke in his face. There was no intruder, only a hole in the door and a line of moonlight beyond it. Miller appeared in his nightshirt, white hair standing in every direction. "What in God's name?" "Rat." The Reverend stared at the smoking pistol, a large one. Miller looked at the hole shoulder high in the door. Neither man mentioned it again. At 4, Silas dressed. At 5, he checked the guards himself. 2 at the North Bridge, 1 near the road from the high mesa, 2 around the Bennett property. Another at the alley behind the church. He told them he expected trouble from debtors angry about foreclosures. No one asked why a wedding required more armed men than the bank on payroll day. By 5:30, Silas stood alone inside the church and listened to the clock. Each tick irritated him. He took the territorial deed from his coat and smoothed it on the altar. The purple seal seemed darker in the candlelight. He touched the forged registrar signature. For 2 years, that ink had been stronger than truth. It only needed to remain so for another hour. Across town, Martha Higgins was locking the back door of the general store when Tommy called from the porch. "Ma, get down from those crates. Ma." Something in his voice made her turn. The boy stood on a stack of apple boxes, one hand shading his eyes as he looked north. A thin line of dust moved below the ridge. At first Martha thought it was a stray cow. Then the shape separated from the morning haze. Horse, rider, fast. The horse climbed the low rise where the road came out of the canyon country. Black coat, broad chest. One iron shoe flashed when it struck stone. Martha gripped the porch post. Tommy whispered, "That's his." She did not answer. The rider crested the ridge. For a moment the rising sun was behind him, turning man and horse into one dark shape. Then he came lower, and Martha saw the face, older, scarred, alive. She sat down hard on the porch step. Tommy's mouth opened. Martha grabbed his sleeve, not a word. "But not yet. Shouldn't we tell Miss Clara?" Martha watched the rider leave the road and disappear into a line of cottonwoods before the North Bridge. "No." Tommy stared at her. "Why?" "Because every man Silas pays is looking for something this morning, and I have no intention of helping them find it." At the bridge, Kanda dismounted. Nantan's sides worked beneath the saddle. Kanda loosened the cinch one notch and wrapped strips of damp burlap around the horse's iron shoes to dull the sound on hard ground. 2 guards leaned against the railing ahead, sharing tobacco. Kanda recognized one from the stage company. He left the rifle in its scabbard. A gunshot would announce him to the whole town. He needed minutes more than he needed force. He moved through the brush along the dry creek bed. The first guard turned when a pebble shifted behind him. Kanda looped a horsehair rope over the man's shoulders, pulled him backward, and pinned him against the bridge post before he could shout. The second reached for his revolver. Kanda looked at him. The man froze. Recognition arrived slowly. "No," he whispered. Kanda took the revolver from his holster. "Hands." The man obeyed. Kanda bound both men beneath the bridge, loose enough that they could breathe and tight enough that they would not reach town before the ceremony began. One guard stared at the scar on his face. "Thorne said you were dead." Kanda checked the knot. "Thorne says many things." He led Nantan into the cottonwoods and removed the burlap from the horse's hooves. From there he could hear the church bell. He also heard voices on the road behind him. Wedding guests. Too many eyes now for Silas to erase what happened next. That was what Kanda had needed. Not darkness, witnesses. He put one hand against Nantan's neck. The horse was trembling from the ride. "So am I," Kanda said quietly. Nantan blew out a breath. Kanda almost laughed. Then he mounted and moved toward town. Martha heard the hoofbeats return before anyone else in the square did. She took Tommy by the shoulders and moved him against the store wall. "Stay here. Where are you going?" "To a wedding." She opened her umbrella, though there was not a cloud in the sky. The bell began before Clara reached the road. One slow iron note rolled over the ranch, crossed the dry fields, and came back from the foothills thinner than before. Elias stood beside the buggy wearing the only black coat he owned. One sleeve had been mended at the elbow. He had shaved badly, a line of blood dried along his jaw. When Clara stepped onto the porch, he looked at her once and immediately looked away. The ivory dress made a soft brushing sound over the boards. "You look like your mother," he said. Clara stopped. "Don't do that." He nodded. He deserved the rebuke and knew it. A hired man sat on horseback near the gate, another waited behind the buggy. Silas had sent a driver, but Elias took the reins himself. "I can still drive my daughter to church," he said when the man objected. The guard shrugged. "Long as she gets there." Clara climbed into the buggy. The ride into Bitter Creek took 20 minutes. She had made it hundreds of times for feed, nails, lamp oil, mail, and church. This morning every landmark looked wrong. The cottonwood where boys carved initials. The dry wash where wagons always leaned left. The blacksmith's yard with its smoke already rising. People stood outside their homes to watch the buggy pass. Some women nodded solemnly. Some looked embarrassed. A few smiled. Clara found those easiest to forgive. They did not know enough to hide what they believed. Children waited near the church with baskets of white petals. The flowers had been brought in by stage from a cooler valley. An extravagant Silas had ordered, because Bitter Creek could not grow anything so soft in August. The children scattered them across the road. Hooves and boots crushed them into the red dust almost immediately. Elias saw Clara watching. "I'm sorry," he said. She kept her eyes on the church. "I know. It was not forgiveness." But it was the first answer she had given him that left a door open. Silas waited on the church steps. His black coat fit perfectly. His silver watch chain crossed his vest. His hair was smooth with pomade. He looked like a man who had spent the night dressing a fear until it resembled confidence. He checked his watch when the buggy stopped. 3 minutes late. Elias's hands tightened on the reins. Clara stepped down without accepting Silas's hand. The crowd shifted around them. Silas smiled for the witnesses. "You should try to look happy. You should try to be worth it." His smile held, but only because people were watching. Inside, the church was warmer than the morning air. Tallow smoke hung near the rafters. Pine pitch sealed the old windows, giving the room a sharp resin smell beneath wool, dust, and too many bodies. Martha Higgins sat near the front with her son Tommy beside her. The widow's eyes met Clara's. Martha did not smile. She placed one hand over the top of her umbrella and gave the smallest nod. Clara understood it as "I see you." For now that was enough. Reverend Miller waited behind the altar. The territorial deed lay on a small side table next to the marriage register. Clara stared at it. The paper had become almost absurd to her after seeing the torn canyon map. All that suffering reduced to ink, stamps, signatures, and men agreeing to pretend they had authority over what they wanted. Silas stepped close. "The map," he whispered. Clara turned her head. He was still smiling toward the congregation. "What map?" His jaw tightened. "You will give it to me after the ceremony." "I burned it." He looked at her then. For the first time that morning, the confidence slipped. Clara smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. The Reverend cleared his throat. The room settled. Elias took his place in the first pew. His hands rested on his knees. They trembled. Silas reached for Clara's right hand. She let him take it, not because she had surrendered, because she wanted him to feel exactly how cold her fingers were. Reverend Miller began. His voice was practiced and calm. He spoke of duty, household, mutual obligation, God's order, and lawful union. Clara listened only in pieces. A fly touched the stained glass window and buzzed against it. Someone coughed near the back. A child's shoe scraped wood. Silas's thumb pressed into her knuckles. The locket pulled faintly at the hidden hem near her ankle. Clara wondered whether she could walk out before the vows and survive the consequences. Silas would take the ranch. He might jail Elias for debt if he could persuade the sheriff. He might destroy the copied map if he found it. He might do worse. She could refuse anyway. The realization came without drama. She did not have to win in order to refuse. The thought filled her lungs more fully than the corset allowed. Reverend Miller turned a page. Outside, something struck the ground with a dull, distant rhythm. No one else reacted at first. Clara did. She knew horses. The sound was too steady for a loose animal, too fast for a wagon team, hoofbeats. Silas's hand tightened. The Reverend continued. The hoofbeats grew louder. A few heads turned. Martha Higgins looked toward the back doors. Tommy stood on the pew until she pulled him down. Silas glanced toward one of his hired men near the entrance. The man stepped outside. The bell rope swayed slightly in the draft. Reverend Miller paused. "What is it?" Silas's voice was too quick. "Nothing." The hoofbeats stopped. That was worse. Silence moved through the congregation. Silas looked at the clock on the wall. "Continue." Miller swallowed. He spoke more quickly now, turning toward the old line in the ceremony, asking whether any lawful cause existed that should prevent the marriage. Silas exhaled. Clara looked at the doors. The first guard stumbled backward through them. His hat was gone. A strip of horsehair rope hung from one wrist. Every person in the church rose halfway from their seat. Then the doors opened fully. Cold morning air swept through the room. Kanda Yaji stood on the threshold. For Clara, the world did not stop. It became painfully detailed. She saw dust in the seam of his buckskin shirt. She saw a dark stain of dried blood near one cuff. She saw that his hair was shorter on one side where a scar crossed his temple. She saw the eagle feather tied with blue thread in his hatband, her blue thread. Behind him, Nantan tossed his head and struck one iron-shod hoof against the church step. Kanda was thinner than she remembered, harder, alive. Clara's hand slipped out of Silas's. No one spoke. Kanda looked directly at her. 2 years lived in that look, no accusation, no demand, only recognition. Clara felt the room tilt. She put one hand against the altar rail to steady herself. "Kanda," Elias whispered. The name moved through the church like a spark through dry grass. Silas stepped backward. No. His voice was so soft Clara almost did not hear it. Kanda entered the church. He did not ride Nantan down the aisle as Clara had dreamed 100 impossible dreams. He came in on his own feet, one step at a time, favoring the left leg slightly. The horse remained at the open doors, breathing steam into the cold air. Silas's hand moved toward his pistol. Kanda stopped. "Don't." It was the first word he spoke. Silas drew anyway. The weapon shook in his hand. Several people cried out. Reverend Miller dropped his Bible on the altar. Kanda did not reach for his rifle. "You are dead," Silas said. His face had gone pale beneath the morning sweat. "No, I saw that mountain come down." Kanda's eyes narrowed. "You saw it?" The question landed harder than a shout. Silas realized what he had admitted. So did the town. Martha Higgins leaned forward. The sheriff, standing in the rear pew, looked sharply at Silas. Silas raised the pistol higher. "I was there after." "I meant after." Kanda took another step. "Put it down." "You think you can walk in here dressed like?" Silas stopped himself. Kanda reached into the leather tube across his back. The pistol jerked toward him. Clara moved before she thought. She caught Silas's wrist with both hands and shoved upward. The gun fired. The shot tore into the ceiling. Plaster and dust rained down. The church erupted. People dropped behind pews. Children screamed. Someone kicked over a candle stand. Elias lunged toward Clara, but one of Silas's hired men caught his shoulder and threw him sideways. Kanda crossed the distance between himself and Silas in 3 strides. He struck Silas's gun hand against the altar rail. The pistol fell. Silas swung with his left fist. Kanda ducked, caught his coat, and turned him into the side table. The marriage register slid to the floor. One of the guards rushed from the back. The sheriff shouted, "Stand down!" The guard ignored him. Kanda met the man near the first pew. There was nothing theatrical in the fight. He used the man's momentum, drove a shoulder into his chest, trapped his arm, and put him on the floor hard enough to take the air from him. Another hired man reached for his revolver. Martha Higgins hid his hand with her umbrella. The gun clattered beneath a pew. "You have ruined enough mornings," she snapped. Tommy stared at his mother with open admiration. The sheriff drew his own weapon. Every gun down now. For once, the room obeyed him. Silas pushed away from the table. His hair had fallen across his forehead. His clean black coat was streaked with dust. He looked at Kanda with hatred so naked it seemed to strip years from his face. "You should have stayed under those rocks." Kanda's breathing changed. Clara heard it. The room heard it. Silas heard it too, and for a second seemed frightened by his own words. Kanda did not strike him. Instead, he removed the leather tube. "Sheriff." The sheriff did not lower his pistol. "What is that?" "Federal order." Silas laughed too loudly. "Forward." Kanda held the tube toward the sheriff. "Read it." The sheriff hesitated. Then he took it. Silas moved as though to grab the papers. Clara stepped between them. "No." He looked at her as if he had forgotten she could speak. The sheriff unfolded the first page. The church slowly rose around him. He read in silence at first, lips moving over formal language. Then he looked at Kanda. This bears the district seal. Yes. And Captain Harlan's signature. Yes, Silas scoffed. Harlan signs anything put in front of him. The sheriff looked at the second page, his expression changed. Caleb Morrow. Silas went still. Kanda reached into his belt pouch and dropped 2 pieces of hardware on the altar. A cut section of hemp rope. An iron piton filed nearly through at the shaft. The metal rang against the wood. Kanda spoke to the room, not to Silas. The West Fork did not fall by accident. Supports were cut. Rope was weakened. Men fired from above when I found it. Silas barked a laugh. Convenient. A man disappears for 2 years and returns with a story. Clara moved to the side table where the territorial deed had fallen half under the register. She lifted it. And a map. Silas's head snapped toward her. Clara reached behind the lace at her waist and pulled a folded paper from the inner lining she had stitched there before leaving the ranch, not the locket. The copied map. She opened it on the altar beside Kanda's evidence. This was in his study. Silas's face lost the last of its color. The sheriff came closer. Clara pointed to the red mark west of the official accident site. He told you to search here. She touched the black circle. But this is where the supports were cut. The sheriff looked at Silas. Is that your handwriting? No. It's his red pencil, Clara said. There are 3 more in his desk, sharpened with the same knife notch near the grip. Silas stared at her. You went through my private papers. I was cleaning your future wife's house. A few people in the pews laughed once, nervously. Silas turned on them. You fools. She has been bewitched by him since she was a girl. She would say anything. Kanda's expression did not change. He took another document from his coat and handed it to the sheriff. Land office copy. The sheriff read the heading. Silas stepped back. Reverend Miller finally found his voice. What does it say? The sheriff looked toward the congregation. It says the Bennett transfer is under federal review for fraud. The room became very quiet. Elias lifted his head. The sheriff continued. There is a registrar's signature dated after the registrar's death. A murmur moved across the pews. Silas's eyes flicked toward the side door. Kanda saw it. So did Clara. Silas ran. He did not make it 3 steps. His polished boot came down on crushed white rose petals near the aisle. The sole slid. He fell on one knee, grabbed a pew, pulled himself up, and shoved an old man aside. The territorial deed fluttered from Clara's hand in the draft and landed ahead of him. Silas lunged for it. Kanda put one boot on the paper. Silas stopped on all 4s. For a moment the 2 men stared at each other. Silas's breath came hard. Move. Kanda did not. You think this changes anything? Silas said. You think these people will choose you over me? I built this town. Martha Higgins snorted. You financed 2 roofs and foreclosed on 6 widows. Silas looked around. No one defended him. That frightened him more than Kanda did. He pushed himself upright. You all took my money. The blacksmith spoke from the back. That doesn't mean we gave you our throats. Silas turned toward Reverend Miller. Tell them. The Reverend stared at the Bible on the floor. Tell them what? That this marriage is lawful. That Bennett consented. That consent? Clara said. Silas faced her. Clara reached down and tore open the seam at the hem of her dress. The stitching gave with a soft rip. She pulled out the silver locket. The chain had tangled in the thread. She wound it once around her fingers. Silas saw it and made a sound of disgust. You kept that thing. Yes, after all this. Especially after all this. His restraint broke. Silas lunged for her. Not for the locket. For her arm. Clara did not wait for Kanda. She swung. The silver edge struck Silas high on the cheekbone beside his eye. He cried out and reeled away, both hands flying to his face. Blood appeared between his fingers. Clara's own knuckles stung where the chain had bitten them. The church froze. Silas stared at her through one watering eye. You. Yes, Clara said. It was all she needed to say. The sheriff stepped between them. Mr. Thorne, you're staying here until I finish reading these orders. Silas laughed through his pain. You work for me. The sheriff's face reddened. No, that was my mistake. One of the hired men near the door began edging outside. Kanda looked at him. The man stopped. The sheriff unfolded Caleb Morrow's statement. Thorne, did you hire Morrow and Vernon Pike to guide Yazi into the West Fork? No. Did you pay them through the stage company? No. Did you order the supports cut? No. Kanda spoke. I heard Pike after the slide. Silas's jaw clenched. He said you wanted the West Trail watched for a week. You were delirious, maybe. Kanda looked at the sheriff. Morrow remembers too. Silas's gaze darted through the room. Clara watched him calculate. Every person present became a number in his head. Who owed him money? Who feared him? Who might lie for him? Who might be bought again? The calculation failed. He looked suddenly tired. Kanda bent and picked up the Bible Reverend Miller had dropped. He placed it on the altar. Then he set the cut rope beside it. "Tell them," he said. Silas laughed weakly. "Tell them what? Why you chose the West Fork?" Silas looked at Clara. Kanda's voice stayed low. "Tell them why the search went east." No answer. "Tell them why my letters did not reach Bitter Creek." Silas's eyes widened. Clara felt her heart strike hard against her ribs. "Letters?" Kanda did not look away from Silas. "3." Clara turned toward Silas. The room seemed to narrow around him. "You burned them." Silas shook his head. "No, but the denial came too fast." The stage driver in the fourth pew stood. He was a thin man named Orrin Beck who had hauled mail through Bitter Creek for 15 years. "I gave one to Thorne," he said. Silas stared at him. Orrin swallowed. "You said Bennett mail was being redirected on account of foreclosure." Silas's mouth opened. "You paid me to leave it with your clerk." The blacksmith muttered a curse. Another man stood. "I saw Pike drinking with Thorne the week before the slide." Then a woman from the mercantile spoke. "My husband sold 3 coils of climbing rope to Thorne's foreman. He said it was for mine work." Voices began coming from every side. Small things, things no one had understood alone. A horse rented under a false name, a wagon returning from the West Fork after midnight, a land clerk suddenly leaving town, a survey notice posted, removed, then replaced with different numbers. Kanda had been right years ago. Nothing vanished without changing something. Silas had spent 2 years counting on the town to notice each change separately. Now the pieces were being laid together. His face collapsed. "I didn't mean for him to die." The word slipped out. No one moved. Silas realized too late what he had said. The sheriff lowered Morrow's statement. "What did you mean to happen?" Silas's breathing became ragged. He was supposed to be driven off. Kanda's expression remained still. "With a mountain?" Silas looked at him with sudden fury. "You were ruining everything." Clara felt cold. "What?" Silas rounded on her. "The ranch was already dying. Your father would have sold in another year. I could have consolidated the water rights, brought in proper stock, made the valley profitable, but he kept interfering." Kanda said nothing. Silas pointed at him. "He told Elias not to sign. He found the survey changes. He told people my interest rates were illegal." "So you killed him," Clara said. "I said I did not mean. You cut a mountain loose above him." Silas looked around as though expecting someone to understand the distinction. No one did. The confession came apart after that, not cleanly, not nobly. He blamed Pike, then Morrow, then Elias for borrowing, then Clara for refusing him. Then Kanda for making white men in Bitter Creek listen to an Apache scout more readily than they listened to a businessman with money. In trying to save himself, he explained everything. He admitted paying the freight men. He admitted moving the search east. He admitted intercepting letters through his clerk. He admitted using a dead registrar's old seal to strengthen the land transfer. He admitted pressuring Reverend Miller to speak publicly about Clara's duty so that the marriage would look voluntary. At that, the Reverend sat down hard in the nearest chair. "I knew about the debt," Miller said, "not the forgery." Clara looked at him. "You knew enough." He lowered his eyes. The sheriff folded the papers. "Silas Thorne, I am detaining you under territorial authority pending the federal inquiry named here, and on suspicion of attempted murder, fraud, coercion, and obstruction." Silas stared at him. "You cannot do this." The sheriff removed the cuffs from his belt. "I believe I just did." The iron closed around Silas's wrists. The sound was small. After all the shouting and gunfire, that small click was what made Clara believe the morning had changed. Silas looked toward her one last time. His cheek was swelling where the locket had struck him. His perfect coat was dusty. One knee was stained green from crushed flower stems. He seemed smaller. Not harmless, never that. Just smaller than the fear he had built around himself. The sheriff led him toward the door. Martha Higgins stepped into the aisle. Silas stopped. For a moment, Clara thought the widow might hit him with the umbrella again. Instead, Martha looked him up and down and moved aside. "That is more mercy than you gave anyone else," she said. Silas was taken into the street. His hired men followed under guard or disappeared into the crowd as quickly as they could. The congregation began talking at once. Clara could not bear the noise. She turned toward Kanda. He had not moved from beside the altar. The scar on his face was real. The dust on his boots was real. His left hand shook slightly from exhaustion. Clara crossed the space between them, then stopped one step away. She had imagined this moment too many times. In some dreams she threw herself at him. In others, she struck him for taking so long. In the worst one, she reached out and her hand passed through smoke. Now she simply looked. "You're alive," she said. "Yes, 2 years, I know. I searched the slide. I found your feather." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. Kanda reached toward her, then paused. Even now he waited for permission. Clara closed the last distance herself. She put both hands against his chest. His heart beat beneath her palms. Once, again. She laughed, but the sound broke in the middle and became something else. Kanda covered her hands with his. Neither of them said the words people in the pews expected. There had been enough public performance for one morning. Elias approached from the front pew. He stopped several feet away. Kanda looked at him. The older man removed his hat. "I believed him," Elias said. Kanda waited. "I believed him because it was easier than believing I had helped put you in danger." Clara looked at her father. Elias's voice shook. "I signed what he put in front of me. I let him use my debt against her. I don't have an excuse." Kanda's gaze moved to Clara. This is hers to answer. Elias nodded. The words landed deeply in Clara. "Not mine to forgive for you. Not mine to decide. Hers." Silas had spent years claiming decisions from her. Kanda returned from the dead and gave one back in a sentence. Clara breathed. "I don't forgive you today," she told her father. Elias's face tightened. "But I heard you." He nodded. "That is more than I earned." Outside, the town square filled with people following the sheriff toward the jail. Clara looked down at the wedding dress. There was dust on the hem, blood on one sleeve, and a tear where she had ripped out the locket. Martha Higgins came near. "We should get you out of that thing." Clara wiped her face. "Yes." Martha glanced at Kanda. "You disappear again. I'll personally find a mountain large enough to finish the job." Kanda studied her. Clara waited. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. Martha looked offended. "Don't grin at me. I mean it." The first laugh spread through the church. It was not joyful exactly. Too much had happened, but it was human. And after 2 years of living inside other people's lies, human felt like enough. Martha Higgins took Clara through the side door of the church before the crowd could surround her. The back room of the general store was cooler than the sanctuary and smelled of cedar boxes, coffee beans, and machine oil. Clara stood in front of the same narrow mirror where the wedding dress had been fitted the day before. This time, Martha did not tell her to hold still. "Turn around," the widow said. Clara did. Martha attacked the row of pearl buttons with impatient fingers. "Silas paid extra for these," she muttered. "That should have warned us. A sensible man never buys buttons this small." Clara laughed once through her nose. The sound felt strange after the morning. When the last button came free, Clara pulled the bodice away from her ribs. She inhaled deeply and almost became dizzy from the simple luxury of air. Martha loosened the corset. "There, breathe before you forget how." Clara stepped out of the skirts. The silk collapsed around her boots. For a few seconds she stared down at it. All night the dress had felt like a sentence. On the floor it was only cloth. Martha went to a wooden bench and lifted a folded bundle. Clara's work trousers, her faded blue shirt, her leather belt, her boots. "You brought these?" "I am many things," Martha said, "but I am not stupid enough to think you'd want to spend the rest of the day dressed like a hostage." Clara changed quickly. The rough cotton felt better than silk ever had. She rolled her sleeves to the elbows and tied back her hair. Martha picked up the torn wedding dress. "What do you want done with this?" Clara thought of burning it. That would have been satisfying. Too satisfying, perhaps. Silas had already taken enough fire and destruction into their home. She carried the dress outside instead. People stopped talking as she crossed the boardwalk. Near the hitching rail, rain from several days earlier had left a shallow mud hole churned with horse prints. Clara dropped the ivory silk into it. The hem darkened first, then the weight of the wet fabric pulled the rest down. No speech, no ceremony. She turned away. Kanda waited beside Nantan near the watering trough. The horse looked almost exactly as she remembered and nothing like it at all. A scar crossed the black hide near one shoulder. One ear had a notch. The iron shoes had been replaced recently, but the left front still carried the wide handmade shape Kanda preferred. Clara approached slowly. Nantan lifted his head. "Hello, thief," she whispered. The Mustang pushed his nose into her shoulder hard enough to make her step back. She laughed again, this time for real. Kanda watched. "You remember me?" she asked the horse. "He remembers who used to steal apples from the kitchen. They were my apples. They were Elias's. Then I was stealing them too." Kanda's smile faded as quickly as it came. The weight of the missing years returned. Clara touched the locket at her neck. The chain had broken when she pulled it from the hem, so she held it in her pocket now. The sheriff will need you. He has the papers. He'll need your statement. I gave it. Then what happens? Kanda looked toward the jail. Federal marshal comes. Land office sends an examiner. Silas talks until someone tells him to stop. And us? Kanda's gaze came back to her. The answer was not immediate. Use happens when you choose it. Clara looked at him for a long time. I want to see the river. He nodded. They rode out of town before noon, not together on one horse. Clara took the bay gelding she had rescued weeks earlier. The animal Silas had dressed in Kanda's old saddle to strengthen his lie. Kanda rode Nantan beside her. That mattered to Clara. She did not want to be carried away from Bitter Creek. She wanted to leave under her own hands. The road toward the Salt River ran through low mesquite and greasewood. Heat rose off the red ground in soft waves. Cicadas started in the brush as the day warmed. For the first mile, neither spoke. Clara kept looking over. Each time she did, Kanda was still there. At last he said, "You will hurt your neck. I'm checking. For what? That you haven't disappeared. I'm trying not to. Try harder." "Yes, ma'am." She nearly smiled, then became angry instead. "You wrote 3 letters." "Yes, 3. Yes. And when I didn't answer, I wrote a 4th. Clara turned in the saddle. "You said 3. The 4th never left the fort. The officer told me the stage route had become unsafe. So you stopped. I started coming back. After 2 years, Kanda accepted the blow without defending himself. Clara's anger grew because of that. "Do not sit there like a rock. What would you like me to do?" "Explain." He looked ahead. So he did. He told her about waking under the slide, about Nantan trapped nearby, about hearing Pike and Morrow above him, about digging his leg free with cedar until his fingers bled. He told her about the high mesa hunters who found him fevered and half-conscious, about his mother cutting away his shirt because the wound at his shoulder had stuck to the cloth, about the infection that nearly killed him after the mountain had failed. Clara listened with her jaw tight. "Why didn't your people send someone to me?" "They did." "What happened?" "The first man never returned." She looked at him. "We found his horse months later." The anger in her chest changed shape. Kanda continued. "The second messenger learned men were asking about anyone carrying my name toward Bitter Creek. By then, Thorne had the sheriff's notice posted about livestock thieves from the mesa. Coming openly would have put more people at risk. You could have come alone. I almost did. Why didn't you? Because I could barely walk." The answer silenced her. Kanda rubbed his left thigh absently. "The bone was cracked. My shoulder opened twice. For months I could not stay on a horse through a full morning." Clara looked at the scar along his temple. "I didn't know. No, I thought you were dead." "I know. You don't know what that was." Kanda turned toward her. "No, I know what mine was." The words were not defensive. They were careful. Clara looked away. The river appeared between the cottonwoods, silver and fast over stone. They dismounted at the place where he had given her the locket. The bank had changed. Floodwater had eaten part of the bend. One cottonwood had fallen and lay with its roots exposed like the ribs of a giant animal. Clara walked into the shallows without taking off her boots. Cold water filled the leather. She did not care. Kanda stood on the bank. "Tell me the rest." He sat on a flat stone. He told her about Caleb Morrow, about the mining camp near the Colorado, about the cut cedar wedge he had carried wrapped in cloth, about Morrow staring at it until his hand shook. "He said Silas promised the slide would scare me away," Kanda said. Clara turned. "You believe that?" "No." "Good." "He paid men to fire rifles at me while the supports failed. He knew what could happen." Kanda picked up a small stone and rolled it between his fingers. Morrow wanted to believe he was hired for intimidation. Men tell themselves many things after they take money. Clara looked down at the water around her boots. "Like my father." Kanda did not answer. She stepped back onto the bank. "Say it." "What?" "That he sold me." Kanda's face tightened. "He allowed Thorne to use you as payment. That is a long way to say yes." "Yes." Clara sat beside him. For a while they listened to the river. "I lied to Pa," she said. "When he was sick. I told him I wanted the marriage so he could stop worrying before he died. He did not die. No. He recovered just enough to watch the consequences." Kanda's mouth moved slightly. "That sounds like Elias." Clara nudged his boot with hers. "You're not allowed to be funny yet." "When?" "I'll tell you." They sat until the sun moved west. Then Clara opened the locket. Kanda's small braid remained inside, darker than the tarnished silver. Beside it was a knot of red thread she had added during the first winter after his disappearance. The thread had once tied one of her mother's flour sacks. She had used it because it was strong. Kanda touched it. You changed it. I had 2 years. He looked at her. Clara closed the locket. I don't know what happens now, neither do I. You used to know everything. No, I used to talk less. That made you look smarter. This time they both smiled. Near sunset, they rode toward the high mesa. Clara had been close to the Apache camp before, but had never entered it as anything other than a visitor delivering supplies or looking for Kanda. This time he rode beside her without secrecy. The path climbed through juniper and stone until the valley opened behind them. Air cooled quickly with elevation. By the time they reached the camp, smoke from cooking fires hung blue between the trees. Children saw Kanda first. They ran toward him shouting. A woman dropped a wooden bowl. An old man stood so quickly from a blanket that another man had to catch his arm. Kanda dismounted. His mother came from beside a lodge near the center of camp. Atsa was small, straight-backed, and gray-haired. She stopped several steps from her son. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she slapped him across the face. Clara's eyes widened. Kanda accepted it. Atsa slapped his other cheek. Then she took his face in both hands and pressed her forehead to his. The camp became very quiet. Kanda closed his eyes. Clara looked away, suddenly aware that some reunions belonged first to the people who had waited through their own nights. Atsa spoke to him for several minutes in Apache. Clara understood only a few words Kanda had taught her. Fool, son, long road. Then that last one made several people laugh. Atsa turned to Clara. Her gaze moved over the work clothes, the swollen knuckles, the torn lace still caught at one cuff where Clara had missed a piece of the wedding gown. Then she looked at Kanda. He said something quiet. Atsa's expression sharpened. Clara reached into her pocket and opened the locket. She held it out. Atsa did not take it at first. Her eyes fixed on the braid inside, then on the red thread Clara had added. She touched the knot with one fingertip. She said something, Kanda translated. She asks who tied the red. I did. Atsa asked another question. When? Kanda translated. The first winter. Atsa looked at Clara for a long time. Then she took the locket, closed it, and placed it back in Clara's hand. Her palm covered Clara's fingers for a moment. She said 5 quiet words. Kanda did not translate immediately. What? Clara asked. He looked almost embarrassed. She says you tied him to the living. Clara glanced at him. That sounds like blame. It may be. Atsa heard his tone and struck his shoulder. Kanda winced. She froze. Her hand moved to the scar beneath his shirt. For the first time, Clara saw fear cross the older woman's face. Kanda covered his mother's hand and said something reassuring. Atsa ignored him and pointed toward a seat near the fire. He obeyed at once. Clara smiled. So that is who you listen to. Kanda gave her a warning look. Atsa saw it. She smiled too. They stayed through the evening meal. No grand ceremony marked Clara's presence. No one declared her accepted or rejected. People passed her roasted corn, venison, and a clay cup of bitter tea. An elderly uncle asked about Elias's best cutting horse. A young woman examined Clara's bruised hand and made an approving sound after Kanda explained how it happened. The ordinary nature of it moved Clara more than any blessing could have. For years, Bitter Creek had treated her relationship with Kanda as a scandal, a symbol, an argument about what kind of woman she was allowed to be. Here she was a tired person eating supper beside another tired person. That was enough. They returned to the Bennett ranch the next morning. The whitewash on the barn looked harsher in daylight. Elias stood beside it with a scraper. He had already removed a patch the size of a dinner plate. Clara stopped her horse. What are you doing? He looked up. What it looks like. The scraper caught another strip of dried paint and peeled it away. Beneath the white, a small curve of the original river mark appeared. Kanda dismounted. Elias did not meet his eyes. I thought I'd start before the sun got high. Kanda looked at the wall. Needs oil first. Paint will come off cleaner. Elias nodded. I've got linseed in the shed. Kanda took the scraper from him. Bring it. Clara watched her father walk toward the shed. You're helping him? Kanda examined the blade. I'm helping the barn, she laughed. Careful. That was almost wise. He looked at her. Am I allowed now? Not yet. The federal marshal arrived 3 days later. The land examiner came a week after that. Bitter Creek discovered that justice involved less thunder than paperwork. Silas Thorne was transferred to the territorial jail after a preliminary hearing. Caleb Morrow's statement was authenticated. 2 former employees agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges. The dead registrar's seal was found in a locked drawer in Silas's office, along with letters addressed to Clara in Kanda's handwriting, opened and tied together with string. The marshal returned them to her. Clara held the bundle without opening it for nearly an hour. She took them to the river. The first letter had been written in a shaking hand. Clara, I am alive. I cannot come yet. Do not believe the story told about the West Fork. I will send word when the road is safe. The second was longer. He described his recovery only in practical terms. He asked after Elias. He asked whether the south fence still leaned after rain. He asked whether the red mare had foaled. The third said he had found a witness. He did not write that he loved her. Kanda had never trusted words large enough to become easy lies. Instead, he wrote, "Keep the locket. I am still on the same side of the river." Clara cried then, not violently. She sat on the bank with the pages in her lap and let tears fall until they made small dark circles in the paper. Kanda found her near dusk. He sat beside her. "You write badly," she said. "I was injured. You spell separate 3 different ways. That was also the injury." She handed him the second letter. "This one says you plan to come by winter." "Yes." "Which winter?" He looked at the water. "The wrong one." Clara leaned against his shoulder. The action surprised both of them. Neither moved away. At the land hearing the following month, the Bennett transfer was declared invalid pending final territorial review. The forged fees were removed. Several debts remained. Real ones Elias had actually borrowed, but without Silas's invented penalties and manipulated interest, the ranch was no longer beyond saving. Clara insisted on hearing the numbers herself. The land examiner tried to explain them to Elias. She interrupted. "I run the accounts." The man looked at her, then at Elias. Elias said, "She runs the accounts." The examiner turned his chair toward Clara. It was a small victory. She took it. The copy of the fraudulent deed Silas had carried to the wedding was returned after being marked as evidence and copied for the court file. Elias brought it home. That evening he carried the paper to a fire pit beside the barn. Clara found him there with a match. "What are you doing?" "Burning it." "The court said we can keep it." "I don't want it in the house." Clara considered. Then she held out her hand. Elias gave her the match. She struck it against the box. The flame caught at the corner of the deed. She held it until heat reached her fingers, then dropped it into the pit. Elias stood beside her. The seal curled first, then Silas's signature blackened. The paper folded inward on itself and became ash. "I should have done more," Elias said. "Yes." He flinched. Clara watched the fire. "I'm not going to make it easier for you by pretending otherwise. I know. You drank. You signed things you didn't read. You let him talk about me like I was collateral. I know. You were willing to let me marry him because it fixed a problem you made." Elias's eyes filled. "I know." Clara turned to him. "And then you tried to get me out." He looked at her. "That does not erase the rest." "No." Elias nodded slowly. Clara looked back at the ash. "I don't know when I'll forgive you. I'm not asking when." "Good." He stood with her until the fire went out. Elias stopped drinking after that. Not because redemption arrived conveniently with a sunrise. The first week he shook so badly he dropped a coffee cup. The second week he became angry at small sounds. Twice Clara found him standing in front of the cupboard where the whiskey had been kept. The first time she said nothing. The second time he handed her the bottle. She poured it into the dirt. He watched. "Waste of money," he muttered. "That has never stopped you before." He laughed once, ashamed and grateful at the same time. Recovery made him less dramatic and more useful. He mended fence. He kept the pump working. He took meals at regular hours. He apologized less often and worked more. Clara preferred that. Kanda did not move into the ranch house. Bitter Creek assumed he would. Bitter Creek had opinions about everything. Instead, he spent part of each week at the High Mesa camp with his mother and part at the Bennett place repairing corrals, training horses, and helping rebuild the herd. Some nights he slept in the bunkhouse. Some nights he rode back north. Clara noticed people waiting for an announcement. None came. One afternoon, Martha Higgins cornered her in the mercantile. "Are you going to marry that man or make the entire town die of curiosity?" Clara examined a sack of flour. Town survived 2 years thinking he was dead. It can survive curiosity. Martha leaned closer. "I would like to know before I order another dress." Clara looked at her. "If you ever order me silk again, I will bury you in it." Martha smiled. "So that is a maybe." Clara bought the flour and left. Kanda was waiting outside with 2 young horses tied behind his saddle. What did she want? "To plan our wedding." Nanton flicked an ear. Kanda considered. "That sounds dangerous, terrifying." They rode home. Months passed. The ranch did not transform into paradise. A winter storm tore half the roof from the east shed. 1 cow died calving. A buyer from Tucson tried to underpay them for 6 steers. The irrigation ditch collapsed twice. Elias injured his hand with an axe and became impossible to live with for 9 days. But the work belonged to them again. That changed everything. Clara rebuilt the accounts from the beginning. She kept Silas's old ledgers as evidence of what not to trust. Beside them, she started a new book in her own hand: income, feed, repairs, wages, debt, payments. At the top of the first page, she wrote no name but her own. Kanda helped restore the barn. They stripped away the whitewash board by board. Some of the original earth pigment had been damaged beyond repair. Kanda mixed fresh color in a tin bowl. Clara watched him grind blue mineral with oil. Make it brighter. It was not bright before. It is now. He looked at her. That is not how restoration works. I'm not restoring Silas's version. He handed her the brush. Then paint it. She climbed the ladder. The river line went first, long and blue across the western gable, then the 3 peaks. Clara added a 4th mark Kanda had not drawn before. A small silver-colored circle near the river bend. He studied it from the ground. What is that? A locket. It looks like a potato. She dipped the brush again. You may sleep in the bunkhouse forever. It is a very good locket. Too late. Elias, carrying a bucket nearby, laughed so hard he had to set it down. By spring, the story of the wedding had spread beyond Bitter Creek. Travelers came through the tavern asking about the Apache scout who rode into a church, and the woman who struck a land baron with a silver locket. The story grew each time it traveled. In one version, Kanda entered with 20 warriors. In another, Clara shot Silas through the hand. Someone claimed Nantan kicked the church doors off their hinges. Martha Higgins corrected every visitor with increasing irritation. He did not ride the horse inside, she would say, and I was the one with the umbrella. Clara avoided the tavern. She had no interest in becoming another story people used instead of seeing her. The truth was quieter. The truth was mornings when Kanda repaired tack at the kitchen table while Clara calculated feed costs. It was Elias learning to drink coffee without rye. It was Atsa visiting the ranch and telling Kanda, in a tone needing no translation, that his fence post leaned. It was Clara riding alone to town because she wanted to and coming home because she chose to. It was Kanda asking before moving his tools into the old tack room. It was the first time Clara left the locket outside her dress instead of hiding it beneath cloth. That happened in early summer. They rode to the Salt River near sunset. The heat of the day had softened. Frogs called from a quiet pool. Cottonwood leaves turned silver when the wind touched them. Clara sat on the bank with her boots off. Kanda stood knee-deep in the water resetting stones around a small crossing. You know, she said, most men would propose before rebuilding a ford. He looked up. Most men drown because they ignore the ford. That is not romantic. I have been told romance caused many of our problems. By whom? Your town. My town also believed you were dead. Fair point. He finished moving the stone and came to sit beside her. Clara took the locket between her fingers. I don't want another church wedding. I did not ask. I know. I was considering it. Dangerous. So I hear. She looked at him. Kanda's hair had grown enough to cover most of the scar near his temple. The scar at his shoulder remained visible above his open collar. You still think promises are foolish? She asked. I think promises should be about what a person can choose. And what can you choose? He took time before answering. I can choose where I return. Clara waited. I can choose not to disappear without leaving a trail. Good. I can choose not to make decisions for you because I think I am protecting you. Very good. I can choose you. The river moved around the stones below them. Clara looked down at the locket, then at him. I can choose you too. There was no ring, no witnesses, no Reverend Miller, no territorial seal. Kanda held out his hand. Clara placed hers in it. That was all. Later, their legal marriage was recorded at the territorial office with 2 witnesses, Martha Higgins and Elias Bennett. Martha wore black because she claimed it was the only respectable color. Elias cried and denied it afterward. Clara wore her blue work dress. Kanda wore a clean shirt Atsa had made and complained that the collar was too stiff. There were no white roses. Afterward, they ate stew at the ranch and returned to work the next morning. The final charges against Silas Thorne took longer. Attempted murder was difficult to prove under territorial law when one hired man was dead. Another had bargained for leniency, and Silas employed lawyers skilled at turning clear actions into fog. Fraud and obstruction were easier, so were bribery and falsifying land records. He was convicted on multiple counts and sent away from Bitter Creek in chains. Clara did not attend the sentencing. She was repairing an irrigation gate with Kanda that day. When the sheriff told her the result, she felt less than she expected. No triumph, no emptiness either, just distance. Silas had once occupied every room of her life. Now he was a fact that required no daily attention. That was freedom too. 2 years after the interrupted wedding, the Bennett ranch had 27 more cattle than it did. On the morning Clara was supposed to become Mrs. Thorne, the south fence was straight. The roof still leaked near the chimney when rain came from the east. Elias had been sober 18 months. Nanton had grown a little gray around the muzzle and remained convinced every apple on the property belonged to him. The barn carried the Blue River, 4 peaks, and Clara's badly shaped silver circle. No one suggested painting over them. One evening Clara and Kanda rode to the ridge above the Salt River. Below them Bitter Creek glowed in the last light. From that distance the church looked small. The jail looked smaller. The river caught the sunset and wound through the valley like a strip of metal. Clara wore the locket openly. She had replaced the broken chain with a sturdier one. Inside, Kanda's braid remained tied where he had placed it years earlier. Beside it were 3 short threads, red from Clara, blue from the feather she had left at the slide, and a pale strand Atsa had added after the wedding. Kanda noticed her touching it. "You check that often. I check you more." "I noticed. Still here, for now." Clara gave him a look. He smiled. "For as long as I can choose it. Better." They sat their horses in silence. The silence no longer felt like waiting. That was the difference. For years, Clara had believed home was something that could be taken by debt, fire, forged paper, or another person's decision. Silas had nearly proved it. He had owned notes, officials, men with rifles, and the confidence of a town that preferred not to look too closely at the price of its comfort. But he had never owned the thing he wanted most. Not the Bennett land in the way he imagined. Not Kanda's life. Not Clara's choice. Below them the ranch lights came on one by one. Elias would be complaining that supper was getting cold. Atsa had promised to visit in the morning and would certainly criticize something before breakfast. Martha Higgins had left 2 jars of peaches on the porch with a note declaring that decent people returned empty jars, a statement Clara suspected was aimed specifically at Kanda. Ordinary life waited for them: fence wire, accounts, weather, family arguments, work. Clara had once thought freedom would feel like galloping away from Bitter Creek without looking back. Instead, it felt like being able to turn toward home without anyone ordering her there. She touched her heels to the bay's sides. Kanda and Nanton moved beside her. They rode down from the ridge together, not toward a sanctuary hidden beyond the reach of the world, but toward a house inside it. A house with scars, debts that were honestly counted, walls that needed repair, and doors that opened from both sides. The Salt River continued through the darkening valley, cold over red stone, carrying away nothing that had not first left its mark.